Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Leader Show, where each week we discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader. This week, we're discussing AI adoption for enterprises with special guest Andreas Welsch, VP of AI Solutions at SAP and industry thought leader, plus other headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 6 Central European Time on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. The audio recording is also available on major podcast platforms. Don't forget to check us out at DEInetwork.com for executive coaching, industry briefings, and peer-to-peer custom research. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up Digital Enterprises Institute and IRPA AI, the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. We're a professional association and peer-to-peer research network providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. My co-host, as always, is Carlos Alvarenga, a researcher, senior research advisor to DEI, writer, the author of The Rules of Persuasion, an educator at the University of Maryland in Georgetown, and former advisor from EY and Accenture. Carlos, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good to be back again for our 26th show again. We're now past 25, right?
26th. I think I was supposed to send you something. Is it gold or silver? What am I supposed to send you?
I prefer money, but that's fine.
I'll take money. How about crypto? How you feeling about crypto these days? No, good. I'm really excited to see that announcement of our 25th episode last week, and time really does fly. I was trying to think of quickly all the topics when I shared it on LinkedIn that we've covered, and we've covered some doozies. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm trying to get a couple links out for those of you who may be seeing this for the first time, where you can kind of see the archives of both the video and audio versions. But it's been fun, Carlos.
Same here, Dan.
So, this week, couple things caught my eye before we invite our guest to join us. The thing with Twitter a bunch of weeks ago, and the Twitter verification check looks like Meta is getting into that subscription game with their own verified impersonation protection and the like. So that was interesting. There was a study out of the UK where a bunch of companies are going to go ahead and adopt a 4-day work week after about a 6-month trial of that. And what we've kind of called the great reshuffling seems to be continuing with both tech layoffs, but also a big tranche of hiring happening, Carlos.
Well, I've heard the same rumors here in the People's Republic of Maryland, right? Because we're talking about going to a 4-day work week as well. At least it's one of the conversations kind of in this part of the country, which is kind of interesting. Two things that jumped out at me from the headlines today were from the journal. Was an article on the rising default rate in office space. And so the long predicted sort of reckoning of office space, investment post pandemic seems to finally kind of be here. The not a catastrophic level, but the professionals in the industry seem to say, look, we really aren't going to go back, right? Hybrid is for real. And as the default rate continues to increase, it's just another sign that we are in a new world of work. I think that, that was expected. The other article that I found interesting was something on fractional executives, which is this new trend for senior people, C-suite level people who are not ready to retire, but have left maybe their last role and have this sort of decade gap that they want to do something, but not a full-time role. So there's an increasingly common model where you are a part-time CFO, part-time CHRO. I've seen this before in Silicon Valley, because oftentimes you get a company that's a startup can't afford a full-time CHRO, and so you get somebody who comes and does marketing or finance in a temporary role. But this is just a new trend, again, future of work, right? People who are saying, I want to leave a full-time role. I don't want to travel anymore. I don't want to work every week, but I don't want to just disappear completely. So the sense of taking a job and dividing it, which we've known at the lower level, right? Because of things like Upwork and other roles that have divided tasks. Now that trend of dividing a job into pieces has reached pretty much the highest levels, one level below CEO, which is an interesting phenomenon, and see and that evolution of how work is considered right in the future.
Yeah, and it's going to be a huge hit to loyalty, right? Employee loyalty we've talked about that a lot on this show, related to the gig economy and all the things happening in the workforce. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and it's not a new concept, right? I mean, we for a long time we even had a program where we were doing it ourselves as well as advising organizations to hire stay-at-home moms because they were, senior executives within the organization. And then they had, left the workforce to have a family and maybe didn't want to go full time back into having to commute into the local city, in this case, New York. And so, you got really great senior level people, maybe at a fractional basis or maybe on a flexible schedule basis. It was good for everybody involved. And I think that's the idea behind this 4-day work week. So apparently the majority of the 61 companies that participated in this 6-month study said they're going to continue with 4-day work weeks. A third of them are already saying they're going to make it permanent because they've seen revenue gains, lower turnover, and reductions to staff burnout. And there's some preliminary results also coming out of similar pilots in the US and Canada. So, I think it's all part of this drive to fix the employee loyalty issues.
Right. And to rethink what work means, right? We've talked about this a lot from the very first show, that so much of the focus of digital transformation is what is my role in the corporate ecosystem? And we've had this model right for almost a century, and it was already under pressure, right? COVID just sort of cracked it open. And I think we're just seeing all this experimentation into a future that looks very different from what work was in the model that goes back to sort of the Mad Men era, right? Cubicles and offices and executives with management. So you're right. It's a very interesting world. And when we throw in AI, right? And again, that conversation we had last week about the AI assistant or the AI role in enterprise, I think it'll just accelerate this move to a reconceptualization of what work looks like in the modern corporation then.
And it's turbulent right now, right? I mean, we tried to stop talking about all the tech layoffs because you and I were, I think, saying that was being a little bit, over publicized. Every time you saw, the news about these layoffs, but they kind of continue. I mean, this week alone, DocuSign is shed another 9%, so they're down 19% of their workforce. KPMG let go about 700 people this week. Wix.com, 6% cut. Cloud provider DigitalOcean, 200 jobs. Twilio, 17% of its workforce. I mean, the list goes on and on. But then on the other side of that coin, according to CNBC, there's 500,000 new jobs just last month, 3 times what the analysts expected. Particularly in the services industry. Boeing is looking to hire 10,000 people. The airlines are, hiring, pilot shortage. Chipotle is hiring 15,000 people. Walmart is saying they're going to raise their minimum pay for store employees to $14 an hour in an effort to attract and retain workers. So it's kind of this tale of two cities, it seems like.
And as we know, it's not a like for like swap, right? Yeah, okay, the numbers show an increase in jobs, but it isn't the kinds of jobs that are being cut, right, in the headlines. What we're seeing is, typically speaking, service sector job, entry level jobs, right? It's the kind of jobs that people are having a hard time staffing, which brings us back full circle to the question of technology and it's no doubt increasing role, right, in not having to replace these roles with human beings. As we've said it before, right? Silicon Valley is waging a war on labor. Technology, in a way, always has. It's just picking up speed these days.
So it's a good segue to introduce our guest. Our guest today is Andreas Welsch. She's an internationally recognized AI leader in the software industry with over 21 years experience. He's led regional business development teams for AI, led and built AI centers of excellence, and currently leads product marketing and go-to-market strategy for AI at SAP. Andreas, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. That's awesome.
So before I jump into probably 2 days worth of questions, if we had the time, Andreas, I'm curious, hearing some of those headlines, and as Carlos alluded to, we've been talking a lot about AI recently, just because of all of the news that's going on around generative AI and Chat GPT and things. So I'm curious, as somebody who's been in the space for more than the last few months, what's your thoughts on what's happening out there?
I think if you look at the market, and even if you look at the headlines, just a couple of months ago, media analysts were talking up the next AI winter. So de-investment, deprioritization of AI, because it hasn't delivered on the promise that companies, corporations have promised us for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And then along comes a little tool called Chat GPT. And all of a sudden, that AI topic gets a whole new momentum and gets propelled again into the headlines. And that's what we're seeing right now. So I think there are a lot of opportunities individually, but also in business and for companies alike, to make use of generative AI for different purposes. A lot of the use cases and scenarios that we see today, especially if they're around something like Chat GPT, are based on text generation, summarizing text, in a way translating it from maybe legal language into something that you or I would understand without having to pass a bar exam. Co-pilots for coding, we've seen these examples as well, and overall helping to kickstart creativity. I feel what we're also seeing at the same time is some of the limitations of these kinds of technologies or models when it comes to understanding of the data that they have been trained on. Is there any bias in it? And how do we actually see that when we use them? And at the most foundational level, right, things like Chat GPT that has been in the headlines and news so much are pieces of technology that are really, really good at predicting the next word in a sentence. And that's what it comes down to. But because we're able to use them for so many different things, people get excited about it, not just in business, but consumers just as much. And that's what I feel we're seeing at the moment.
Andreas, I had a question. As I look at ChatGPT and DALL-E and some of these other technologies, right, and I think about just that, like you said, that evolution of AI in the last 5 years, I wonder if the perception should be different if it was just called augmented intelligence versus artificial. Because as you see these tools, they look more to me like an augmentation of what you already know, which could be cartography, map reading, right, writing, research. It seems like it's an additional level of intelligence to an already intelligent being versus a replacement for that intelligent being.
I think there are different levels in what you're mentioning. Going back 5, 6, 7 years, we started talking about this technology as machine learning, or even more specifically, deep learning. And then marketing came along in Silicon Valley and VCs, and we started slapping AI onto it. So because it's more all-encompassing, it's larger, it's bigger, it sounds a little better than machine learning, because they're not really machines, right? It's software, it's systems, but not really physical machines. So I feel in a way we're seeing the evolution here as well. Whether it is augmented intelligence or artificial intelligence, to me, is a matter of what is the purpose that we are going to use this technology for. Is it to augment a person's tasks or work? Or is it more of a technology that's underneath that is mimicking human intelligence, but is artificial in that sense?
So is that maybe the split we're seeing? Just to follow up, Andreas, when if I go to a restaurant and there's a tablet there, right, and there I'm being told, use the tablet to put in your order, right, the screen, that's more towards the artificial side because it has replaced the person that used to stand there. When a very skilled researcher is using something like ChatGPT to accelerate research, that's more augmentation. Is the way the world's going to get split in the future?
I wouldn't make it so dependent on is it replacing somebody or augmenting. I think at the end of the day, it's what are you going to achieve with it. And whether that is automating something that you fully delegate to an AI, for example, in business, it's give me a scoring of leads and propensity, which ones are likely to close, instead of me figuring this out or relying on my gut feeling. Or if it is more of an augmentation, like a writing assistant. At the end of the day, it's a matter of productivity and increasing productivity through the use of technology. And AI, machine learning, deep learning, generative AI, whatever we want to call it, in my opinion, is just a means of getting there. And maybe there's something else in 5 years or 10 years in that broader space of AI, or something completely different.
Andreas, and you have some background as I do in kind of the RPA and software automation space. And you think about, what really happened in that space was, I think kind of a perpetuation of organizations doing things the same way they were doing them before, but now trying to automate a piece of a person's job. Where I see some of the really exciting opportunities with AI is to rethink those processes and those systems in such a way where you don't necessarily need a person at various points sort of do a particular job. So to your point, I think you don't have to think of things in terms of it replacing a human or doing what a human would do, like automation, but we can actually rethink some of these systems and processes to, get back to what the end result really should be. Yes?
Absolutely. I think that's the real opportunity here. And I also feel in many ways we're repeating the same steps, or also the same mistakes that we've made in businesses just a couple of years ago. And that is looking at a shiny new object, call it generative AI, looking for a problem, as opposed to the other way around. What do I actually want to achieve? Where do I have a business problem? And maybe, is AI even the best technology to solve this problem? Or is it rules? Or is it RPA? Or is it workflow management or something else?
So you've worked with beyond even your role at SAP. You've done this with other organizations, and you've been kind of advising large enterprises, Fortune 500. What are some of the projects? What are some of the use cases, Andreas, that you're seeing that maybe somebody watching who's trying to maybe not make those mistakes that they made with RPA or other technologies? What should they be looking at?
I think, first of all, it's a matter of the approach. And that is understanding, first of all, what is the business problem you're trying to solve? And how is it measurable? Is there a KPI that you can influence, ideally directly, if you introduce more automation or something like AI? Or is it a KPI where you only see the effects on that KPI once you introduce that technology? Because I feel making it measurable then also makes it tangible and helps you get buy-in from stakeholders in your business units, for example, because they want to know what's in it for me. If you're asking me to invest money in this or resources, what's the return for me? So that's what I would recommend starting with first, and in any case, regardless of AI or RPA in that sense. The opportunities, I think, are then to some extent business specific, but we do see recurring themes. For example, in finance, how can you close the books more quickly if you can match your incoming payments to open invoices, or do your reconciliation at the end of a period more quickly with the help of AI, because it recommends things that should be reconciled together, so you don't need to do it in that finance function manually, but you do spot checks or cross checks. Or in functions like HR, going back to the example that you've given with hiring, if these companies are hiring hundreds or thousands, tens of thousands of people, imagine the influx of resumes they're receiving. And the poor recruiters or hiring managers, they need to review these resumes. So is there AI built into your HR systems, for example, that allows you to sort, to rank, to prioritize these resumes so that you are able to more easily focus on those candidates that seem to have the best fit or the best match between the resume and the job description? So tons of opportunities.
So Andreas, and again, I'm not a technologist in the enterprise space, just as someone trying to understand it from the outside, is what's happening that AI, quote unquote, is being embedded, or as it's deployed into existing processes and corporate technologies, or is it itself? I guess it could be one of three things, right? It's something which is added to a pre-existing technology stack to make it better. It's its own application, or it's a platform in which someone else comes along and creates an application of some kind on top of that. So what comes close to describing the way AI, when it's being deployed in things like finance, like you said, or in HR, within those three kind of categories, right?
So I think it's also a matter of how is it the easiest for a business organization or a business user to consume the benefits or receive the benefits of AI. There are tons of valid use cases to go off and build something on your own. I see that mainly where it's core to your business, where it's really differentiating and investing the resources and the time to build your own models on the platform gives you that competitive edge in the industry. There are other tasks that every business needs to do, but they're still core. And so making it easier on that side for businesses to use AI without having to invest their precious and scarce resources around data science to build something in finance or in HR to help you close the books. I think that's the shift that I'm seeing at the moment. So making it easier for businesses to use AI without having to invest these resources.
So maybe the answer to the question that is that, again, to the layperson, look, what you've got is a set of capabilities that are new, right, in these AI machines, software machines. And on day one, you might use that to enhance an existing process to make it more efficient or more accurate. On day two, you may invent some new capability that this technology enables that is new, that isn't just making something already there work a little bit, that we have the potential to do both, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. I think that sums it up very nicely.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, Andreas, so much of the challenge I think with AI is, I guess a lot of technology, but I think it's particularly a challenge within AI is, adoption as a whole, but a starting point, right? You're talking about a technology that really benefits mostly from data at scale, right? And so the old kind of concepts of proof of concepts and pilots that can be very, very limiting. On the other hand, I've been in conversations with clients where where we've introduced them to a technology company or an AI company in some cases, and it's difficult for them to grasp the inner workings of what they're going to get out of an AI solution when, in particular with, this particular solution, it was kind of a black box, right? Because the service provider, wasn't willing to show the IP and the stuff under the hood, right? But they wanted the customer to just kind of trust that they could do it. And the customer was kind of like, well, if I can't see how it works, then how can I take this on? How can I, sell this internally?
I think that mirrors my own experience as well, having worked with customers in that area. And the reason why I have seen this type of feedback from customers, and maybe that's also the same for you, is manifold. On one hand, you have people who have done this task or this job for 10, 15, 20 years. They know it in and out. They know their process, they know their business, they know their business partners. They also know whom to call if something goes wrong. And now you introduce this piece of AI, whether it's a black box or it's a white box where you have a better understanding of what's actually happening. But this piece of AI now tells you as a business user what the best answer is, or maybe automates part of your job or part of your task, even if it's the one that you didn't like doing anyways. But this thing now tells you what to do, and it does it better than you do. So naturally, you do have an apprehension against this, and say, well, I don't really trust this. I don't really know how it works. And if I don't know how it works, then how can I troubleshoot it? Or if I'm still on the hook, if this goes south, I need to know what's actually happening. Maybe also for very good reasons. Risk management and controls, especially in regulated industries, are there and are put in place. And so these organizations also want to need to understand, well, how does the thing work? Especially if maybe you book something on the wrong account, or there are other implications here. So from that perspective, trust is essential in also making these AI systems as explainable as possible, meaning giving additional contextual information to the user of why or how a prediction has been made. Then again, creates trust, and especially trust if a prediction ends up being a false positive. So something that you do not want to have where it makes an incorrect prediction. So you can at least troubleshoot and see, well, it's these are the highest influencing factors why this was matched or this was proposed is actually incorrect. So maybe we do need to investigate and dig in a little further.
Andreas, I had a question about sort of living in that boundary, right, between humans and machines, or human intelligence and quote unquote artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
This issue of trust. Do you see it as a generational issue, like so many other things in technology, that the generation that will grow up with AI buddy from the cradle, right, is not going to have this problem, that we're just living through this transition because the people who you're dealing with as enterprise clients just didn't grow up with it, but the ones who grew up with it are not going to think anything of it 10 years from now or 15 years from now when they enter the workforce?
That's an excellent point, and a very good perspective to think about this. I believe that there is certainly this component of growing up with this kind of technology that will make it easier and will make it more easily accepted. On the other hand, I feel also the way we do business, the rules, the regulations, the laws also need to catch up in that sense. Or we need standards, that mandate this kind of transparency, so that if something happens, we are able to trace it. So I think it's both. It's on one hand a mindset. Hey, I'm growing up with this technology. It's natural. It's ambient. Even smart speakers and our children being able to use them with ease. But then also the rules and requirements that we need to meet and to fulfill, they need to match each other as well.
And I think that I mentioned this to Carlos a couple of weeks ago, Andreas, that to me is the real exciting part of ChatGPT and other things like it, right? Is that, it's now democratized this for a lot of people, where the typical person can, play around with it and start understanding it and getting at least the concepts behind it. It reminds me of a number of years ago where, you had some really interesting advances in consumer electronics and technology, and then people would go to work and their experience would be so legacy centric that they said, hey, how can I get an experience at work like I have at home, because it's easier to get stuff done at home, right? So when some of the newer innovations came out, and I think it was marketed as, hey, we can kind of recreate that now in your work life. Hopefully that's what happens now with AI, where people don't scratch their heads and say, what is it? And isn't this ML? And, get caught in that that naming conversation or debate. Instead, you really get a sense for, it being a foundational technology to achieve certain outcomes.
Definitely, right? And that definitely brings back memories, right? Bring your own device and these kind of things. Or my company only has Apple. I love Android. And organizations opening up. I think there's definitely a shift that is going to happen in that direction.
Well, the other thing I think is just, again, back to that thought, right? Yesterday I went to the movies with my younger son to watch this movie called Missing, and which is a really entertaining movie. And in this movie, this young woman, her teenager, her mother is kidnapped. So she goes to try to find her mother. And the whole movie takes place on a computer screen, pretty much. You're looking at her computer. And as she moves from Google, Gmail, TikTok, right, Facebook, Meta, whatever, and the screen just constantly jumps very, very quickly through about a dozen apps, basically, right? And through her manipulation of the apps, the kind of the mystery is sort of solved. And what was remarkable was that the audience that we were in was really mostly all about the same age as my son, 15 or so, sort of that age. And they were anticipating what was coming next, right? So I think that was the most fun I've ever seen a teenage audience have in watching a movie, because they would say, look and, check WhatsApp or whatever. And so they were just telling the girl in the movie, right, what you
Yes.
should do next. And they say, log into this. And so you had this sense of what struck me is that we're probably not too far with all those things will sort of merge, and right, and that person will be talking to one thing that'll say, what was the last phone call she made? What was the last time she checked her email? What's the last message she sent you? So it's a really fascinating, I thought, sort of preview into that generation's view of technology as the synthesizers of all these things that were coming at them. And to our point from last week, and probably the least used thing was Google. It was everything else that sort of had value in the search. So are we kind of headed towards that, Andreas, as well, that we're seeing these things in bits and pieces today, maybe? And then when we turn the next corner, all of these will sort of fall into one thing, and that's the next big evolution.
I'm wondering in that regard, as we're seeing the search wars and AI wars heating up, and by the way, personally, I don't like that term of a war in that sense. But as we are looking at something like Bing AI or Bard and Google, I wonder if there is an abstraction layer for information that we are creating and are about to create because of the use of AI. Go search for this information, synthesize it, report it back to me in a language that I'm able to understand easily and quickly. So if these systems have tentacles and tethers into different other applications, I believe this information abstraction layer, if you will, is certainly something we'll see in the coming future.
It's a really interesting point. By the way, not to give anything away, but the hero of the movie ends up being Siri, which is exactly what you used to describe. So it's this integrator, right? That sort of is the hero of the day. And you're right. Maybe the search war since is developed because what's coming next is you'll never search, right?
Yes.
Maybe
Yeah,
we'll think
you just ask.
Oh, my dad used to have to go search for stuff on this thing called Google, right? And
right,
they don't even know what it is.
So, Andreas, what's your advice? I'm thinking about back to that example I gave before of this company that we were working with, and I spoke to so many executives who were telling me that they had a challenge, telling me that it was a C-level priority. We'd introduce potential solutions to them, and it seemed like the risk in implementing the AI solution was bigger than the challenge that they were facing. So what's I'm curious as to where you are on this this risk versus AI being a competitive advantage, and then how do you accelerate the adoption within an organization like that?
So look, I've seen many companies go through similar cycles. I've seen it through my corporate role at SAP, and for the last 2 years also through being a creator and a trainer on LinkedIn. So that's for example, you see here, Chief AI Strategist of Intelligence Briefing. That's what you see me post and write about on LinkedIn. So in that persona, my recommendation is to look at use cases, look at business value, but really, first of all, and most of all, make sure that you bring your people along. AI, to me, is most of all a people topic first and a technology topic second. So there's so much change management that you need to do around all of this before you get to the AI and before you build an AI model, before you deploy an AI model. You need to involve your stakeholders. You need to identify them. You need to share with them very openly, transparently, and clearly what you want to achieve and understand the challenges that they're facing today. So you and your technology teams can actually translate that into KPIs, into outcomes that you want to achieve, and then look at the data that you have available and what you can actually do with that data and how that data best answers the questions that your business stakeholders are asking. That to me is a very promising, or the most promising approach to doing AI. And then also, once you roll it out, make sure that your business stakeholders and subject matter experts are not just at the receiving end of getting something that's thrown over the fence, but again, that they've been involved from the very beginning, throughout, and all the way to the end, the deployment and the refinement of that solution. That to me creates the highest level of trust in the organization, trust in AI, but also trust in leadership as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that, beyond the traditional use cases, and the driver of cost savings always being the primary one. I think there's significant opportunities in revenue creation, in kind of new opportunities, new business lines, new revenue opportunities where where a lot of these technologies can be used. So it doesn't always have to be. I think so many of the at least the corporate execs that I speak to, look at the lens through efficiency and cost save around existing, existing processes and systems. But what additional revenue lines and opportunities and better experiences can we create as organizations? I think that's really the open area.
I do agree. So a lot of times when we evaluate AI scenarios or use cases, you will hear, well, employees are able to work more quickly or will reduce the burden of XYZ manual steps, and they're just going to be more satisfied and happier. And that's fine. That's a very valid point. But also at an exec level, your goal is most likely beyond just happier employees. Certainly that is something that we want to achieve. But if you make an investment, you're also looking for a return. So striking that balance between the two is definitely top of mind.
It's a good point. One of my favorite companies is Warby Parker, and I had to get new glasses from Warby Parker. And one of the things that was new was that in the app, you can take an eye test right on the app. And they have this other thing where it sort of measures a distance, I think, of between your pupils. And the pupil thing was allowed, and that worked perfectly fine. But the eye test is not allowed in the state in which I live. Mm-hmm. And so again, back to that, there's a regulatory barrier that doesn't allow this innovation. I assume there's some AI-ish sort of skill, right, in the fact that this app can give me an eye test and replace an optometrist right immediately. And so there's that element of society has to kind of catch up probably to some of these innovations. And just I have one last question that was going back to something earlier, that here we were talking about AI Winter 2.0 a few months ago, and then suddenly, boom, here comes ChatGPT. As you look ahead and you say, the next version of that will come when we can do this, or maybe you already see it and we don't. Put the futurist lens perhaps for a moment and go out and say the next surprise will look something like this.
I think right now we're looking at scenarios that are more or less in front of our nose. How can we use what is available today, and how can we put that to good use in business to do things better or cheaper? It'll be interesting to see what the next set of use cases and scenarios is on top of that. So while a trend like the metaverse was the hot thing just the year before generative AI, and Facebook rebranding itself as Meta with mixed success, as we're seeing in the news. If we think about an evolution towards virtual worlds or virtual reality and immersive experiences, I feel there's a significant opportunity if these different technologies then come together. If you are able to hyper personalize an experience, because I know what Carlos typically shops for or enjoys doing, or movies he watches, or what Carlos' son's what Carlos' son enjoys watching. Personalizing that at the split second, using things like generative AI to create a dialogue, to create an experience that, again, is tailored to you, combining that with something like generative AI for images or video and voice, I think there are huge opportunities there to create experiences that are entirely different from what we know today. And that is within reach as well. And then we can only see where it goes after that.
Yeah, you beat me to my next question, Andreas. So it's going to be about AI in the metaverse. But the other part of it that we talked about last week on the show is the issue around privacy. And it's an overused analogy, but if AI is the engine, then data is the fuel, right? And so what's your advice for organizations trying to find the right balance between lack of privacy and ultimate data, and really getting the maximum benefits out of these AIs, because with the limited data set, they're only so useful, right?
I believe the rules and regulations are there for a reason, and that is very well intended, and it is there to protect us as consumers and our interests, and also aligned with the values that we hold dear in different parts of the world. So the values we share here in the West, or even as a society in the US. So when it comes to that, and me personally, having grown up in Europe, in Germany specifically, data privacy, data protection is a sacred good, if you will. So I believe there is a fine balance that organizations need to strike, and they need to identify, not only for themselves, but also in a larger ecosystem. What is it that we want to do? What is it that we believe adheres to our values? And certainly companies will optimize for economic impact and prosperity, which is fine. But there are certain boundaries and boundary conditions within you're able or supposed to do that. So I believe this should and has to be a guiding principle for these organizations, and then add or layer ethics on top, as well as a key component in that as well. What do we want to use this technology for? What is an ethical use of this technology? But still, at the same time, innovating and running a business and making money. I think that's the split that companies will need to do and need to understand better as well going forward.
Sounds good. Andreas, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Carlos, as we wrap up here, any final thoughts? Seems like there's a lot to think about in this conversation.
A lot to think about it. And it's fascinating as he talked about this push forward, right? Because it is. If you work in the enterprise space, it's from the outside, it's hard to comprehend the risk, the regulatory issues, right? Everything that it takes to run a modern corporation, and then you introduce what is potentially a very disruptive new technology. It has to move slowly, sort of by nature, right? So, but it would be interesting to see if he comes back on the show again. I hope that he does, to say, where is that boundary, right? Not 5 years from now, but today. Are there any client cases or anything you're working on that you say, boy, I see the promise of the technology in the enterprise space in these kinds of projects, which is something I personally would like to see next time we talk to Andreas.
Yeah, and as he was speaking, I kind of visualized this kind of dichotomy of the consumer world. It's almost like let's do this at all costs until somebody like the regulators or Congress slaps us on the wrist and says, hey, no, you can't do that anymore. Versus the corporate world is almost the opposite paradigm. It's like, let's be as conservative as possible and wait till this thing is completely figured out before we take on any risks. But you realize why it's so advantageous in this era to be a startup, right? Because you kind of have nothing to lose.
But I think you brought up a great point. When I was a consultant, we would say there are only two kinds of consulting sort of projects, right? You help a client not spend as much, or you help a client make more, right? So, and it's much more fun to live in the help a client make more world than it is to live in the help a client save money world. And the sooner AI moves from here's a way to save this much on a process, right, to here's a different way of thinking about customer experience, or even a completely new kind of product. And it isn't just the consumer stuff. As a little aside, we're putting a new floor in our basement. And one of the things that the company that we're working with would allow you to do is just to upload a photo and see different floors in your own house. And back to his point about experience, right? That's an consumer, but it's manufacturing, right? Kind of old fashioned quote unquote industry. And yet it was a really nice use of something like visualization. You can imagine Dolly suddenly comes in and you say, wait a minute, don't limit your thought to this. Let me show you, right? New paint, new this, new that. And suddenly the tab goes up, right, in the shopping cart as the AI sparks your imagination into a new way of thinking about your home. So to Andreas' point, I don't think we're that far away, but I think the interesting part is moving it from how do I shave some costs from this process to how do I rethink how I do business, and can this allow me to have a different experience to customer and grow the top line that way?
Yeah. Carlos, always a pleasure. And just a reminder for you watching, we're here to help. If you need help with a project or you want to get some advice, message me or visit us at deinetwork.com. Otherwise, we'll be back next Wednesday, as always, live noon Eastern. Have a great week, everybody.
I'll see you next week, Dan. Bye-bye.